everyone, and welcome to our webinar. The topic we are going to discuss today is generic medicines in Europe and implications for cancer treatment and care. My name is Barbara Leonardi. I am the president of the MPE board, and I am an editor-in-chief of HEMA Info magazine for patients. I am also a myeloma patient myself. I'm based in Poland and I am involved in the Polish patient organization. The topic of this webinar is also very close to my heart because when I started my treatment, we already had issues with medicine and we were waiting to get generic medicine for our patients. So just briefly to introduce the topic. What is a generic medicine? Basically, when a branded medicine loses its patent protection, which is after 10 years, other companies can start producing and providing access to generic medicine. So it's the medicine that would have the same active ingredient, but will be labeled with a different name. Today we are going to discuss this topic broadly. We want to explore what it means for patients to have access to generic medicines. It's definitely a cost-saving opportunity for the healthcare system, as you will see. And also now, many drugs, including myeloma, will lose their patent protection, and we can expect some more generic drugs on the market. However, the situation is not always very easy for patients, and we will also look at some case studies, and we will discuss and ask questions how to overcome barriers and how to overcome issues with generic medicines. We are going to discuss these several points. We want everyone who attends our webinar to leave with the basic overview of the market of generic drugs. We want you to understand the issues that some countries, some nations faced and how they overcome them. We will discuss the examples provided. And there will be an opportunity to also ask questions, and our panelists will answer them and we will have a discussion. So now briefly let me show you the agenda of our evening today. We will have two speakers who represent the pharma industry, and then we will hear three patient advocates presenting their case study. As I mentioned earlier, after this part of presentation and case studies, we will have a moderated Q&A, and you can all ask questions. Now, for the housekeeping rules, I think everyone is very familiar with webinars and Zoom right now. Just to briefly remind you that because we are using a Zoom webinar, you are not able to see the participants, you are able to see the presentation and the speaker. But you can be in touch with us either via chat or via the box Q&A. You should have the Q&A box at the bottom bar of the window. If you struggle and if you have any issues, you can contact the MPE team and someone will help you. You can just drop us a question in the chat box. Right, and now we can move on to the main part of our evening, and we can start with our presentations. The first one to speak is Raluca Radu, who is an Associate Director for Pharmaceutical Policy, Medicines for Europe. Raluca is a pharmacist by training and has been working in the regulatory and health policy space for the past 7 years, focusing on patient access to medicine. Raluca, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Barbara. I hope that you can hear and see me all right. Please let me know if that is not the case. But I also want to say thank you very much to the MPE team for inviting us to participate in this webinar. So my presentation, if I can move on to the next slide, please, will focus a bit on what are generic medicines. I won't insist too much how they are approved from a regulatory point of view, and then also try to explain a bit how do generic markets operate in Europe. And the caveat that I already need to make there is that it really depends country by country, but I can also help point you out to some resources that you can use to understand how things work in your country. So maybe before I start, just briefly introducing Medicines for Europe. So we are essentially an association representing companies which manufacture generic medicines, but also biosimilar medicines and what we call value-added medicines. I think that a lot of what we do is focused on ensuring that patients have sustainable access to high-quality medicines and help drive improved health outcomes. So if I can move on to the next slide. I think that first of all, just right off the bat, to say that across Europe, 7 out of 10 medicines which are used are generic medicines. So we have, I would say, extremely extensive experience in using generic medicines across different therapeutic areas, across different populations, across different diseases, and the current scientific and I would say practical understanding of generic medicines is based on that. So I think that as Barbara mentioned, generic medicines are quite appealing because they bring a lot of savings to healthcare systems and they help make them sustainable. However, I think that what is more relevant for patients from my perspective is that in many cases they increase access to treatment. So we've seen this, for example, in diseases like diabetes, hypertension, or epilepsy. When generics enter the market, access has doubled over the past 10 years. That is because a lot of the times countries apply certain, I would say, limitations or restrictions in terms of what can be prescribed, to what patient populations can be prescribed, in trying to manage healthcare expenditure and also in trying to make best use of the medicines available. However, when generics enter the market, affordability becomes much less of an issue. So therefore, these restrictions are lifted and patients end up having more access. If I can move on to the next slide. So as Barbara mentioned, and here I won't insist, generic medicines are essentially developed to be the same as an authorized reference medicine or a branded medicine. How this is done, and I think that that's perhaps the part which is most relevant, is that let's say, sameness is confirmed not only by using the same active substance. So, for example, I know lenalidomide is used quite a lot. So it's not only by using the same active substance, but also using the same dose and also authorizing it in the same indication and way of using it as the originator product. This is also confirmed through a form of a clinical trial, in fact, which is called the bioequivalence study, where essentially the profile or how the medicine is distributed in the body of patients is established to be the same. So that is part of the reason why we can say that the effect from a generic medicine is the same as the effect of the originator medicine. And this is what allows us to reference the data from the originator product. As Barbara mentioned, generic medicines can only enter the market once the originator patent has expired. So I think that, and that's something that perhaps Arnaud might mention a bit more on. It's important to note that it's not only a regulatory exclusivity which is applied to generic medicines, which is 10 years, but in all cases, there is also a patent protection which runs in parallel and can run longer than those 10 years. If I can now move on to the next slide. So in practice, and I know that this is good to keep in mind, is from a regulatory perspective, all medicines, as you know, must have a marketing authorization from a regulatory authority before they can be put on the market. So this is the case for any type of medicine, be it generic, originator, biological, biosimilar, or whatnot. They must have a review by a healthcare authority. The second thing, which is again important to note, is that the standards to which regulatory authorities hold companies to are the same standards in terms of safety, quality, and efficacy for both generic medicines and originator products. The difference between them is how these things are proved. So again, in the case of an originator product, the efficacy is established through clinical trials, through checking between a group of patients which receives the treatment in most cases, and a group of patients which does not receive the treatment or receives a placebo, to establish this efficacy. In the generic space, this efficacy is considered already established, and a generic medicine or a generic company references the data of the originator. The third thing to keep in mind, and I think that one of the questions that I received before the meeting, is why do some products are authorized in one country but not in the other, and why they might be available in one country but not in the other. So in essence, from, again, regulatory perspective, there are two ways of getting a marketing authorization, more or less. There is a centralized procedure which takes place at the European Medicines Agency, which results in a product having one marketing authorization across all, at least, EU member states and EEA countries. And then there are so-called national procedures, which result not in the product having one regulatory one authorization valid everywhere, but rather authorizations in each member state. And depending on the company, depending on the size, depending on I would say each company's strength and weakness in different markets, they might choose to authorize the product in one or more countries. I think that that's quite important to know, because many generic medicines, in fact, go for these national procedures. So that means that one product or one company might not have a marketing authorization in all countries. So there's a lot more to be said about the different procedures, but the European Medicines Agency explains that in quite a lot of detail. So I'm happy to share the link to that after the webinar. Then if I can move on to the next slide. And here comes a bit the tricky part, because whereas everything which is dependent on the regulatory system and on getting marketing authorization is, let's say, regulated at European level, pricing and reimbursement and how health systems work in practice is something which is regulated at national level. So that means that all policies applied on how medicines reach patient and everything that I will say from now on is just an overview and some examples of how it works in different countries, but the reality is that it varies. And we have quite a comprehensive, actually, overview of these policies and what is in place in all the countries. There's the link in the presentation, so feel free to have a look to understand how it works for you. So essentially, after a product is approved, companies must go through pricing and reimbursement processes in each individual country. This can also cause some differences in access because while in most countries it takes approximately 3-4 months, we also have quite some outliers. So for example, in the Netherlands, the process takes 1 day, whereas in other countries such as Belgium or Greece, it can take 6 months. Then prices are usually set by the government, and normally this is done by either comparing with the price of the originator product and applying a certain percentage of a discount, or comparing it with prices in other countries and again applying a formula. This again is something that depends country by country. In many countries, this is applied all at the same time. The problem that we sometimes face, especially when it comes to external reference pricing, so comparing the price with other countries, is that a lot of countries in the EU choose to use a formula of having the lowest price between the countries that they compare with. But then obviously, if many countries choose to have the lowest price, then it ends up going down and down and down and down until it becomes, in many cases, unsustainable. And then lastly, just to mention, in Europe, most medicines are reimbursed by the state or health insurers, which is something that differs quite a lot from places like the US. If I can move on to the next slide. So how medicines reach patients, in principle, and again, the details differ quite a lot. It's either they go through hospitals or they go through community pharmacies in many cases. Essentially through hospitals, usually it's the hospital purchasing the medicine and then delivering it to the patient. When it comes to pharmacies, either the pharmacies or patients are reimbursed by the health system. If I can move on to the next slide. So just a couple of words on how it works in hospitals. So essentially in hospitals, a hospital or a group of hospital or a country or a region, again, it depends, and many forms and multiple forms can apply in each country, put out a tender wanting to buy a certain medicine. Usually these are organized by active substance. So you would have, let's say, this is a bad example because paracetamol is not that much used in hospital, but let's say paracetamol, the hospital or the procurer puts out of call for offers for paracetamol. Then companies submit their offers and the procurer chooses which company to work with. These contracts last on average 1 to 2 years. They can be up to 4 years in quite rare cases, I would say. And essentially during this period, individual hospitals can place orders from the winning supplier. So it's not that in the beginning of the tender you agree that I will buy 100 boxes of paracetamol or 1,000 boxes of paracetamol, but rather you agree that these were the quantities that we used in the last 2 years, and then individual hospitals can place orders under the conditions which were agreed. I think that here there's a lot of room for improvement, and there's quite a bit to be said on this, because in many cases procurement practices are not organized in an optimal manner. So in many cases this is based on price-only criteria on awarding a single supplier, which is not very positive in terms of ensuring security of supply, because if you have only one supplier or one company on the market for 1 to 2 years, then if something happens, obviously it would be much more difficult to avoid a shortage than if you had 2 companies or 3 companies active on the market in that period. I think that the other thing which is important for you to know is, because of this system, the specific each hospital or group of hospitals might award a different company the contract. So the specific product, not the active substance, but the specific product and the company from which it is available might be different depending on the hospital where you go to. If I can move on to the next slide. So the other question that I think is quite common is why, and I also saw something in the chat, is why do prices differ for patients in pharmacies, and why do prices differ in general? So for us, for the generic sector, again, this is a decision at government level. This is not a decision by the company in most cases on what to price a medicine and how much this costs patients. How it works in practice, again, a lot of country-specific considerations, but I would say whereas hospital treatments are usually covered in full by the state, at pharmacy level, most countries apply a form of patient co-payments. I would say approximately 2/3 of EU countries apply this. So this form can differ not only on the country, but it can differ on the region, it can differ on the product. So whether it's an originator product or a generic product, it can differ on the patient. So for example, in many cases, pediatric patients or also retired people are covered in full by the state, whereas the working population needs to cover a part of the prescription. And it can also differ on the disease. So in some countries, patients with a certain disease are fully covered, whereas patients with other diseases are not. So what are some common forms? And with that, I will also finish. In many cases, there are prescription fees. So for example, in Italy, depending on the region where you might be in, you might have to pay a certain fee in the pharmacy to dispense your medicine. In England, this is the case. In other countries, such as in Romania, there is a percentage of the medicine price which is paid by the patient. In other countries, there is the option of, for example, if the patients choose an originator product instead of a generic medicine, because of the difference in costs, they might be asked to cover that. And then lastly, what happens, and this is a specific, I would say, case in the Netherlands, I think that this is more common with private insurance in general, is that you have a deductible. So your insurance steps in after you have paid a certain amount. So if I can move on to the next slide, I think that, feel free to post any questions in the Q&A. I've tried to keep it as simple as I could, but I appreciate it's not a very easy subject. So I'm happy to take questions in the Q&A, and I'm also happy to take questions afterwards as well, if there are any remaining ones. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raluca, and I think you did a really good job of explaining in simple terms how the generic market works and the mechanisms. I think there will be some more questions in the chat for you, and we will get back to them at our Q&A session at the end. And right now, we are moving on to our second speaker, Arnaud Maheas, who is the chair of Generic Market Access Committee at Medicines for Europe, and is also a head of Global Policy and Public Affairs Europe at Sandoz. Arnaud will speak about challenges, and opportunities from the industry perspective. The floor is yours, Arno.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you, Barbara, and thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to talk to you and provide our perspective. If we already move to the next slide, maybe a few words on Sandoz. Sandoz is a generic and biosimilar company, it's a leader in Europe and globally, and we do only two things. We do only generics, the small molecules. I saw a question in the chat, and we do biosimilars. This is the only thing that we do. So we only supply to the market, to patients, molecules that have lost all their protection, and we'll come back to that notion later on because there are different ways to look at it. So we are a pure player, very, very much focused into what we do. Another thing maybe, and I think Raluca did a great job to explain a very complex situation. So today we look into the generic market only. I think the biosimilar would deserve another session. That's maybe an invitation to you if your member think it's important. But I think this dichotomy between a system where the regulatory part, the quality part is very harmonized, very European, versus everything that is linked to the market conditions, the way patients have access to the medicines, the price, etc. All of this is extremely national. So there's this tension all the time. So that's why I would say every country is a specific case. So also to understand also the way I approached this presentation, and just also to start, because I think it's core to what generic medicines and biosimilar offer. If we only look at Sandoz across Europe, it's about almost 500 million of patients that we supply with our medicines. That was last year. It's very recent figures. And also the savings. The savings are extremely important. They are key, I think, to the value proposal of our industry to healthcare system. Almost 10 billion of savings if you only look at Sandoz last year. And if we look more broadly, so not just the difference between the price of the original medicines and the price of the generic medicines, then the value is even much broader. This is what we call the social impact. Maybe another number to understand a little bit the difference between what we do and what originator pharmaceutical companies do. At Sandoz, we have in Europe about 12 to 15,000 different presentations covering about 2,000, 3,000 different molecules. So we do a lot of different things. We have very broad portfolio. So that also explains a little bit the complexity of what we do. And I think it's important to have these numbers in mind. I promise. Oh, sorry, I was on mute. I'll try to keep these numbers now for the rest. If we move to the next slide. The other thing, and I come back to it later if we have time, looking at Sandoz, I think supply and where we manufacture medicines is something that is very important. Sandoz is a very European company. We have 15 manufacturing sites globally. 11 of them are spread across Europe, and you can see from Spain, France, Slovenia, Austria, Germany, and Poland. So a very European company. And we think if we look at the challenges, the perspectives of the industry, this is something that is extremely important if we look at the world around us these days. But I come back to that later. I will start maybe with on the next slide and take a step back. Now I'm going to speak more collectively, so not specifically about Sandoz, but this is a report that we've worked with together with Raluca exactly 2 years ago. And it was to look into what is the value proposal of generics. What do generic medicines bring to healthcare systems, to patients in Europe? Obviously, when you think about generic medicines, it's about the economic value, it's about the savings, it's about the number I gave you before that. But also it's about access for patients. I have also another slide to show a recent example. So it means that once we have the possibility to enter the market, then we bring two things. We bring huge savings to healthcare systems. This is really, I would say, our core mission. And bringing these huge savings, we usually increase also access for patients. That's the two most obvious features, I would say, of generic medicines. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind, and that's something that is often overlooked, although I would say during COVID, that was something that was very well recognized, is that we also are really the backbone of the supply chains. And because of the volume, the sheer volume of medicines we provide, essential medicines, it is extremely important. We play a critical role in terms of securing the supply of medicines. And of course, without us, I would say potentially the medicines on the market from the originators would never really be challenged. So I would say also we are part of the drive for innovation, and we're part of the reasons why originator companies keep investing into research and bringing new medicines, better solutions for patients. This is, I think, part of the dynamic. We're not just here to bring copycat medicines. I think our role is also to trigger this competition and this virtuous circle where challenging monopolistic situation, we oblige the rest of the industry to be and to stay extremely innovative. That's something that is important to keep in mind. Now, I'm going to deep dive a little bit on the next slide on the fact that if you look at the European Union list of critical medicines, 92% of the medicines on the list are generic medicines. So that's how important generic medicines are. And you have also specific numbers if you look at the oncology part. 14% of these 92% are oncology drug. And if we look globally, that's the global number. 80% of all medicines in terms of volumes are generic medicines for about 30% of the cost. That's a global number. In Europe, the ratio is more 70% volume to 30% cost. But again, that's the overall European Union. The second thing very important that is, again, very often forgotten on the next slide is the link between the presence of generic companies and the security of supply. And one thing that is very important is that the more players you have, so the more competitors you have on the market, the better. And I will have, and I will mention later, a case study that has been very well documented a few years ago in Germany. And I will explain the dynamic here. It means that once you have a lot of consolidation, or once you see generic medicines leaving the market, and meaning that patients depend on 1, 2, 3, 4, less than 5 providers, it means that anytime one of these supplier has a problem, then it's more difficult for the other ones to catch up and to provide the supply just right away. So that's where usually we see a lot of friction and we see shortages happening. So again, I think the more competition, the better on that sector. Going into the next slide, I would like to stress that, so it may look a little bit complex, but I think what is important to understand, and Raluca explained it very well, is that although every country has a different way to set the price of medicines, so, and the money we receive as a company, but also the money that patients have to pay, if there is a copay, if there is some part that is covered by the patient, is extremely rigid. It's something that is very hard to move. And I think almost mathematically, the price and the money we receive for a given medicine goes down. There are very, very few exceptions to that. At the same time, and we saw it during COVID, we saw it with the war in Ukraine, we see it today with what's happening in the Middle East, we see that at some point, the cost of goods increases, the cost of transportation is increasing. And all of that we have to absorb. It's our job, I would say. It's the job of the generic industry to provide the savings, to produce at scale. But at the same time, at some point, it may become extremely difficult. And when this becomes kind of too hard for us to keep absorbing increased cost while our price is just staying the same or decreasing, the very few levers we have for adjustment is to leave the market, if we can. If we are the last one, usually we try to avoid to leave the market. That's something we don't do as a company. But also what we've seen also is a lot of offshoring, so companies that leave Europe and produce outside of Europe. And this is where you go into the risk for patient in terms of access. To give examples on the next slide, I have two different set of examples. I think if you click, yeah, you will see this is rather old and it's relative. Germany is a bit the extreme in Europe in terms of very high penetration and a lot of the volume of medicines on the market that are generic medicines, which I would say is good, but at the same time for a very low price. And you see here the graph stops in 2020, so almost 6 years ago now. I've just saw numbers. Today we have almost the same volume. 80% of the volume of medicines sold in Germany are generic medicines, for now about 7% of the price. So a lot of pressure on the price. And if you translate that into absolute figure, to give you an example, and I took the example of a very common antibiotic on the next slide, amoxicillin. You will see, and we compare it with coffee, but you could compare it to many different things. And here are prices in Germany. So also the price of coffee might be lower in your country, but here we compare apples with apples, so to say. But yeah, it costs 16 cents a day to treat a patient with amoxicillin in Germany. And if you compare to the benefits of antibiotics, and antibiotics is not just to treat infection, but it's also medicines that you need very often to treat cancer patients, and it's something that you have to take on a long perspective. So very, very inexpensive product, very affordable product. Again, that's our job. The question is that how much sustainability do you have here? Because obviously what you get in a box here from Sandoz or any other generic suppliers in Europe is very high quality, super highly controlled medicines. So the amount of work there, the amount of scrutiny we have is extremely high and does not necessarily reflect in the price we get. And this leads me to one example that you may have heard of. That was a few years ago on the next slide. A few years ago in Germany, we had a case of tamoxifen. Tamoxifen is one of the most prescribed drugs to treat breast cancer. It's very, very prescribed in Germany. So most women that have had breast cancer are still on tamoxifen in Germany. And in 2022, what happened is that the price of tamoxifen had went down like tremendously. So for 1 day of treatment, the price, so not even the money we get, is about 8 cents. So 1 pill, 8 cents, 1 pill per day. And at the same time, what we saw is that over the course of 15 years, from about 20 suppliers, there were only 3 main suppliers left with 85% of market share. And what happened over the course of only 2 months is that, and it was Sandoz plus 2 other suppliers, the 2 other suppliers had a problem, a supply issue to manufacture the product. So we were left Sandoz alone. So it means that just almost overnight, without warning, we had to cover for the rest of the market, which was a huge quantity. And the fact is that tamoxifen is a very highly potent medicine. So you cannot just manufacture tamoxifen everywhere. For instance, at Sandoz, there is just one manufacturer where we can do it. And this facility is very utilized. We use it a lot, almost full time, because it's very rare. It's very controlled condition also for the workers there, extremely hard conditions. And we had really to deprioritize other medicines to be able to produce tamoxifen back and supply the market. And at some point we had almost 100% market share. But again, here, the example is to show that the price, the pressure on the price has consequences on the consolidation of the market. And then once you have a problem, there is no backup or almost no backup. So that's I would say the one of the main issues that we see today in Europe in different shapes and forms across the markets. Now, I'm going to mention, and maybe I'm going to be a little bit quick, but we will have time for Q&As, a few other opportunities and challenges if we look into the future. So if we look into the next slide, one challenge that we have, and maybe you've heard of it, maybe you have not heard of it, but there is a directive, so it's EU law now, and it's about to be implemented, where based on the consumption of patients, so not based on the production, we will have to cover for the treatment of wastewater with the last stage of treatment, the most expensive stage of treatment. And we don't think it's a fair way to do it, because obviously if you are a patient and you are prescribed the medicines, there's nothing that you can change about it. You need the medicines. And also, if you look at the manufacturer, we manufacture the medicines that work, and the part that is a pollutant in the medicines is the part that is active and is the solution and the cure, the treatment to the disease. So here we think there is a gap, or there is a big contradiction between environmental objectives, and it's not about clean water, it's about who pays for clean water, and the objectives of our industry, which is to supply and allow access to as many patients as possible. That's one of the main challenges that we face. The second one on the next slide that I would like to mention, and I hinted at it before, is that clearly we are more and more dependent on China as one of the leading supplier of active ingredients in Europe, and not just Europe. The US is exactly in the same situation, and we see that being dependent on a single geography, or losing the capacity to produce essential medicines in Europe, is also something we can see it as a risk, but also we think it's an opportunity today to keep what we have, because we still have a strong footprint in Europe, and also possibly to expand on that. But that has a price, again, that is not necessarily compatible with the pricing pressure that we see. The last topic I would like to tackle is about patent protection, and when we can have generic medicines coming to the market. And if you look at the next slide, first is a few numbers. I promise that we will not have too many numbers, but here, and lenalidomide was mentioned before in the chat. Here you see that before and after, so before in dark blue, and after launch of generic, usually it means that more patients have access to medicines, and sometimes the difference is really huge. It also very often depends on the price of the original medicines. Having said that, and if we go into the next slide, and I'm almost done, what is very important is that country by country, product by product, and this is often something that explains the differences of access or timing of access between patients, is that the number of protections, the patents attached to a single medicines, and the way courts and judges look at it country by country can differ tremendously. And this is really an area where we think, as a company, as a sector, that a lot of the patents, not the first one, not the original invention, but that in the life cycle of the medicines, we see more and more patents that we think should have never been granted at first. And we think that, and it's not just that we think it or we believe it, because what we see is that when we go to judge and go all the way following the procedures, about 89% of these patents are amended or revoked, meaning they were not good patents. These patents should not have been awarded. But the problem is that in the meantime, it creates a gray area where patients have delayed access, because some patients will always rely on the generic version until it's launched. And also healthcare systems are losing money because they still have to pay for the more expensive original version. So on that, I will conclude before I eat all the time. And on the last slide, I mean, I think the message that we want to convey is very much that on all these topics, I think working together with you, with healthcare systems, is very important because we think that we can tackle these challenges in a much better way for your benefit.
Thank you, Arnaud. Thank you for sharing your perspective with us. I look forward to our discussion later at the end. I'm sure there will be questions. And after hearing these two industry perspectives, we are moving on to our patient advocates and to case studies. The first one is from Poland, access issues with generic lenalidomide in Poland. And the case study will be presented by Karolina Rokicka, who is involved in the Carita Foundation in Poland. She's a volunteer and a patient advocate. Karolina?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you very much for the invitation and for having such a wonderful opportunity to share the perspective of Carita Foundation. Big thank you for it. And today I would like to walk you through a case study, as Barbara already mentioned, that showed how fragile our medicine supply system can be, and also how important the coordinated actions really are. So starting from the very beginning in 2025, Poland faced a sudden and serious shortage of lenalidomide, that is a key medicine in hematologic oncology. So the 5, 10, and 15 milligrams doses, so the ones that in fact are used the most often, became unavailable. And the 20 milligram dose was still on the market, in fact. However, for most patients, it wasn't suitable alternative. This meant that many people were at real risk of having their treatment interrupted. And for patients on maintenance therapy, even a short break could have a serious consequences. When we started looking into this situation holistically, we quickly realized that the problem had several root causes. On the production side, there was a temporary and permanent stop in production, limited capacity, and a market dominated by only a few suppliers. But the crisis also revealed deeper system issues, as Poland had no tools for emergency import, no fast response procedures for shortages, and a procurement system itself was also too rigid to adapt when supply suddenly dropped. There were also some organizational challenges that we've been struggling with. Some hospitals had exclusive contracts with the wholesalers, which meant they couldn't buy the medicine elsewhere. The tender system also encouraged concentration of supply, which made the whole system more vulnerable. And what stood out most was that this was a Polish problem. Yes, other European countries, in fact, did not report a similar shortages, which showed that the root cause were specifically to our national system. Moreover, the Ministry of Health explained that production decisions were made by companies and that the government had no legal basis to launch emergency import. They also said that the hospitals were responsible for securing treatment and could, in theory, buy from the different wholesalers. In reality, the system was not working in a way that protected patients at all. And actually, this was the point of time when Carita Foundation stepped in. We were among the first to understand how serious the situation is. We gathered some information from patients and hematology centers, also checked availability in the other European countries, and brought together the stakeholders who used to talking to each other in the past. So we organized a roundtable with the generic producers, some medical experts, and the Ministry of Health. And at the same time, we also raised the issue through the Council of Patients Organizations. So it became a part of the national advocacy agenda. After all, we received support from European level. MPE played an important role, for instance, by helping us connect directly with Sandoz. And that was actually one of the key producers and helping us to confirm whether the issue was limited to Poland or of a wider trend. They also co-signed a letter to the Ministry of Health, which strengthened our advocacy and also showed that the problem had been noticed beyond the Poland level. Alongside the advocacy work, we also had an act to the ground. So together with BMS, we secured an emergency donation of the 1,000 packs of lenalidomide medicine. Carita Foundation coordinated distribution across the entire country, also support the centers in registration processes and monitor demand to make some patients could continue their treatment. When it comes to the short-term actions, the action like the redistribution using alternative and more flexible purchasing help to finally stabilize this very difficult situation. But the crisis made it clear also that the long-term reforms are significant, which is the better monitoring of the shortages, more diverse suppliers, more flexible procurement systems and mechanism that allows quick intervention when supply is at risk. In the end, the 2025 lenalidomide shortage showed how vulnerable the Polish system can be and how quickly patients can be put at risk. But on the other hand, it also showed the essential role of the patient organizations. We can spot the problems early. We can bring people together and combine analysis, advocacy, and some practical support in a way that directly protects our patients in the end. So to conclude, I would say that the key message of this history seems to be quite clear and simple, that our role goes for beyond representations. We connect the system, we ring the bell alarm when something goes wrong, and finally we help build healthcare structures that are resilient, transparent, and purely focused on the patient needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karolina. And now we are moving to another part of our region. It will be a presentation by Mira Armour, the CEO of Myeloma, a Croatian patient advocacy organization. And Mira will tell us about the situation in Croatia and in Bosnia. Hello, Mira.
Hi, Barbara. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to MPE for inviting me and giving me an opportunity to share direct patient experience of getting to medicine. Next slide. So basically, I think everyone knows we are in the month of action against myeloma. And in Croatia, we were really, really busy on awareness, but also on access. We managed to get on the Good Morning Croatia program, and we lit the world. We had hematology departments with us, but access in Croatia for patented drugs hasn't been sorted out for the latest one by specifics. But we have on one side, we have awareness. On the other side, we have access. Very important for working patient organizations. Next slide. So whilst we were sort of trying to make people recognize myeloma, at least in Croatia, we had the news that in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there was a shortage of bortezomib. So why did I come to Myeloma Croatia? Is because since 2019 we have developed a program called Support Without Frontiers, and we have helped in that period. We have had many patients get the basic drugs available, for essential drugs for multiple myeloma. So how it works actually, so on the left hand side you see a little slip of paper on which it says bortezomib 3.5 milligrams. This patient needed, I think, 4, and it did have the stamp of the physician. Basically, the problem was, we talked to Myeloma in Bosnia because we work on this together. The problem was that there was one company that had a tender. That tender quantity was used, and basically they didn't have anything for the patients. So the patients started receiving, in the federation, they started receiving little either slip of paper or prescription from their hematologist saying to them, you know, you need to go and get some bortezomib if you want treatment. So this crisis is going to last till the mid of April, so you know how patients will be feeling, because the treatment really can't stop, it's weekly. They tried local pharmacy in Sarajevo. There is Alkaloid Skopje, and they are selling one bottle for 580 convertible marks, and that's about 290 euros for one. So that basically for 4, as many as you need in one cycle, that's 1,200 euros per cycle, and sometimes this money is reimbursed and very often it's not. There is a company who had a tender, and this is public information, so I put it there, that's Hemofarm, and their listed cost in Bosnia is 90 convertible marks, but they really have lost their tender now. So what happened, they came to communicating in between myeloma in Bosnia and myeloma in Croatia. We have helped 8 patients get bortezomib and 5 patients get lenalidomide. Lenalidomide is problem is Republika Srpska. Bosnia is very complicated in the structure and healthcare system. I'm sure you will hear about that a lot. So next slide. So what are the opportunities, challenges accessing Croatia or Bosnia? I mean, this was a case, basically this is a running case. So apart from thinking of what are we going to say on the national TV in Croatia, we were trying to source bortezomib at a price which is accessible to patients. We have very good relationship with some of generic producers in Croatia. So whilst in Croatia we are sorted out, and the system works, we don't have shortages that often sometimes, but the system seems to somehow resolve them for the essential drugs. In Bosnia, that's not the case. And that has been going on since 2013, really. And the work with Bosnia started then. Nermin was reached to myeloma patient in Europe because he needed Revlimid for his father. That's how, actually, that was the beginning of myeloma in Bosnia. Next slide, please. So in Croatia, I'll describe the process. We were trying to think outside the box to improve the access. And more or less, I'll tell you in a few sentences how the process works. Next slide. And our goals are actually to support patients and carers in every single stage of their pathway through diagnosis and treatment, to lower the financial burden and toxicity, and also to make these World Health Organization has essential drugs for myeloma treatment, and those are bortezomib, lenalidomide, thalidomide, melphalan, and now it's daratumumab. This program started in 2018, and it's called Compassion Without Borders. It's very structured. Next slide. Because basically accessing care treatment can be a major risk for patients. So what we want to do is we work with generic pharma companies which are registered in EU and in Croatia. We also collaborate with hematologists in Croatia and in the country where the patient reaches us to help them with the medication. And we have created a network of trusted pharmacies in Croatia. Next slide. This is the biggest problem actually, is the fact, obviously it's very expensive, and we needed to spread the word. We informed hospital hematology departments, main hematology departments in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Kosovo. We did that basically between Myeloma in Bosnia organization and Myeloma Croatia. So I listed here since 2019 how many patients have been helped. Unfortunately, I mean, the things are better. We even managed to get some of the patented drugs available for patients. But you can see that the system is very breakable, basically, and that whatever Arnold mentioned earlier, the fact that you don't have enough generic companies registered in the country is a big problem, and shortages in Bosnia are current and they can happen very quickly. Next slide. In Croatia, we have a dedicated number for people, and also on our webpage we have a process of how they need to, what they need to send, its prescription, the sort of hospital letter from the doctor that they need medication, and we supply them. We are intermediaries, basically. We don't handle medicine, or we don't handle money, but we make sure that the medicine is genuine, it's safe, and they know where to go and get it. So in that way, hopefully, this crisis will be overcome. This is happening now in Bosnia. Next slide. And what lesson we have learned? We need to collect. I think we do need to collect, and we need to collate the stories. We need to have them available somehow. What is happening in Poland with lenalidomide a couple of years ago, it can happen elsewhere. Maybe it's happening elsewhere, but we don't know. What's happening in Bosnia now, you know. Hopefully that is sorted out. And it's very important for all of us to become healthcare literate, to really learn how medicine gets to us. We all take it for granted at the hospital, we should have it, but how it gets there, we don't know. And when it's not there, then you have people with pieces of paper with strange names running around Europe, Turkey, India, Austria and elsewhere, searching for the medication, getting prices which are like from 80, like in this case, 80 euros in Croatia to 1,000 euros in some of the countries in the region. Next slide. What improvements we would like to see, and that's why I'm here today and I share this story with you, because it's very, very hard to have this going on whilst we are thinking of, awareness. So what do we want to happen? Next slide, or next topic. We need to raise this issue at the highest political level. We need to be heard at EU level, and we need to share these stories, and we need to improve the communication between patient organizations and share our best practices. I think that's it, more or less. This is Slavko, who managed to get his medication, and what he sent to me, I shared here all these little screenshots. I'm grateful for you, for your initiative, which made recommended treatment possible in my local hospital. Thank you. I think that's the end. I think I overstepped the time, but the topic is so important, and it's very difficult to say things in 5 minutes. Thank you, Barbara. and everyone.
Thank you, Mira. The topic definitely is very important, and I know that we could speak for hours about it. And I also really liked the point you made about communication and sharing good experiences, because really we can learn from one another, and that's why we need to have sessions like the one we have today. Thank you, Mira. And we are moving on to our last case study of today, and this one will be about not myeloma, but about CML. And I am very happy to welcome Jelena Cugurowicz, Chair of CML Advocates Network Steering Committee and CML Associations of Serbia. Jelena, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, MPE, for having me here. It's a great pleasure to share our experiences. And I think that, as Mira said very well, the patients should learn from each other. Also, the organization and the global organization should learn from each other. So I will try to bring the story of the CML here today. And I honestly hope that some of our experiences will help you in your fights in your local countries and in the European markets and all other markets across the world. Before I start, I need to make it very clear that chronic myeloid leukemia is treated by oral medications which are taken by most patients daily. So they are, since 2010, they are life-saving treatments, and these patients with Gleevec have gotten the illness which from a dying illness became a life-saving and a chronic disease. And for most of them, their drugs are life-saving drugs, and they really need it every day, and it is very important for them to have them, and it is also very important for them to believe in them. So the first time the CML came into across generics was on the European market was in 2012. The first market was Serbia, because there was no patent license in Serbia. So the first generics who came into market in Europe, so I'm not talking about India and other markets, so it was in Serbia. The first reaction of the patients and the first reaction of the community was simply fear. The reason I already said, there was no proof of quality for the patients, and they had to take the drug which they know anything about. So they had a life-saving drug, now we have something which is called generics. The CML-AN sat down and we realized that we need to do something in order to help our patient advocates across the world, how to deal with the generics. And the first and the most important thing that we realized was that we need to educate the advocates, meaning that we had webinars about what are generics, what are biosimilars, what are copy drugs, what are different things that are coming into market. Then we made the glossary, then we had all the scientific literature about generic drugs in CML collected on one place. Also, we followed up the presentations from different conferences, and we made a best practice toolbox for patients on generics. You can find all these on our website, on the part where you have generic TKIs. I have on purpose skipped CML generic declaration and TKI register because I would kindly like the new slide. Thank you. The next slide. So, like I said, in 2012, we experienced generics for the first time in Europe. In 2014, we met during the CML Horizons conference in Belgrade again. And at that point, we had patient organizations from 58 countries together in one room. And we realized that we need to make a declaration of what patients want and what do patients expect from our doctors and from generics. This we put 5 most important things in this declaration. First of all, we wanted it to be a reliable proof of quality and equivalence. Then we wanted it to have a comparative clinical data to ensure comparable efficacy. We wanted no switching for non-medical reasons in optimal response and tolerance. We also wanted no switching in the period less than 1 year, and we wanted a frequent monitoring. Why? Because we wanted to make sure that the patients are going to be well. Our declaration is very important today also, and I will tell you about it later, but it is also very important to say that it was accepted and recognized by the medical society, by the doctors in Europe, and it was published in Leukemia Journal in 2016. Next slide, please. The other thing that we did, and it was also very important, we made an unofficial, non-commercial CML-AN TKI register. What we realized that across Europe and across the world, we had completely different generics used for the drugs used in CML, especially for imatinib. So we started collecting all the information we had about different generic drugs used on different markets. At the moment, we have 80 original drugs and generic drugs in it. Why this register is important? It's not just to have it all in one place. It is also very important because the patient advocates in one country or the doctors in one country can go into this, look at it and say, okay, good, here are some people who use it. In some other country, let's talk to them. Let's see their experience. Let's see how it showed up on, how are patients using it? Is it the same? Do they have some other side effects? And so this is not only something that can be used by patient advocates, this is also a good way to communicate with the doctors and to find where are the doctors using this drug, this generic drug. Also, because the CML community was very afraid, the first thing we were very afraid was whether the efficacy is going to be the same, because we have seen that there are many generics coming from India, only repacked in Europe, especially in the East European countries, which are not part of EU, and we had no idea about the efficacy. So we collected the drugs. So each advocate who came to CML Horizons in 2016 in Ljubljana brought a pill from its own country, branded in a box, and we collected all of them. We took them to Israel. We did the research on them, and it showed that most of them, actually very high percentage of them, had the same efficacy. So this is something that we did because we wanted to be sure that they are good. Next slide, please. So you will say, okay, great, CML has good efficacy drugs, the fight for generics is over, so we are done. It's not exactly like that. We have the issue, for example, the patients, every time they go to their doctors, they get the different generic drug. Different generic meaning different manufacturer. And even though generic companies would say, no, everything is the same, we all know it's not the same. The efficacy might be the same, but what differs is that they are made of different excipients, the way of manufacturing, the way some are pills, some are tablets. So for example, in Serbia, you had 5 different generic drugs for which you would say, okay, it's the same. But what showed in reality is that not all of them are tolerated the same way by the patients. So some patients say, okay, guys, these are tolerated well, these are not tolerated, we have some very hard side effects, and so on. So we come to the question, in the illness which we have the proven good quality of life, should we fight for more than just efficacy of the drugs? So we as a CML community say yes. So what do? We actually teach our advocates to use the CML generic declaration, where you have that drugs should not even, no matter how cheap they are, they should not be changed for non-medical reasons, meaning to be sure that you tolerate that drug well. Then we encourage patients to report to the doctors the side effects of certain generic producers. Why? Because not all are tolerated the same. And we also want to use this data to fight for not changing the generic drug, but also to use this data to fight with the health authorities. Even though these drugs are the cheapest ones, they are not the best ones for patients. So if we have good efficacy, it's fine, but we want more. We want good tolerability, and we also want good quality of life of our patients. Also, we empower patients to educate themselves, to know what they can say and what is okay, what is not okay. So, for example, in Serbia, we have a Viber group. They share their knowledge, they share how they are feeling. And of course, one part of the country is not maybe getting the same drug as the other part of the country. So sometimes they just unofficially, without the knowledge of us, they decide to share among themselves because they want the drug which is well tolerated by a certain person. Next slide, please. So we also have markets which are a little bit different than Europe. We have spoken a lot about Europe today, but Europe is not only EU, Europe is also Serbia, Europe is Kosovo, Europe is Georgia, Europe is Bosnia, like Mira said. So we have countries that, for example, we have donation programs like Max Foundation working and operating on them for a long time. Should we fight for generics or leave these countries for donation programs? We have yes and we have no, we have pros and we have cons. I'm not going to talk about that today, but there is always a question whether we should leave to originated drug and donation programs or go for generics. Then we have markets where we have nothing. So should we just fight for generics, or should we, is on this market also important the quality of life, like on other markets? So these are all the questions which go beyond just having generic on the market. So I would just conclude with what the CML community stands for. We say a big yes for the generics, but the quality and the tolerance should never be a question for any patient anywhere in the world. Thank you for having me. The next slide, please. And I would like to thank my colleagues from the CML-AN, and I want to thank all my 133 organizations across the world for working on this generic issue with me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jelena. I think it's very important to bring this patient perspective because you rightly said that there are many different points of view and there are many issues. And that's why we need to keep talking to each other. So we have about 10 minutes left for questions, and there were many questions in the chat and in the box. I think they all fall in certain categories. We can say that we have some health-related questions, we have some access-related questions. So probably the best course of action to follow up on Jelena's presentation is to focus on the health issue and tolerability issue. So Arno and Raluca, could you share your view on what Jelena said on the experience of the CML community and on the quality of generics?
Arno, do you want to start or do you want me to start?
Yes, you can start. I can add it.
Okay, so I think that first of all, just to say that we completely agree with the fact that at the end of the day, the important thing is access to quality assured generic medicines. And I think that that's very important to mention. I think that in general, at least when it comes to EU regulation, that is extremely strict in assessing the comparability between two products, including on safety profiles, including on more or less everything. In addition to that, or having said that, the other aspect, and I think that this is extremely important as well, is that patients report the side effects that they have. So in the EU, at least, I am unfortunately not extremely familiar with the regulatory system in Serbia, but I am assuming it works in a very similar way. Regulatory authorities and also companies are obliged to investigate any side effects which patients or healthcare professionals or literature, in fact, reports, and they also are obliged to assess it differently if they know, for example, the brand name of a product or if it happens with a specific product. So you can either report yourself as a patient to the regulatory authority or directly to the company. Companies have contact points for pharmacovigilance where you can report any side effects that you experience. Or you can also, I know in some countries, but I think that this is a bit more complicated at times, to report it for your healthcare provider. So either for your pharmacist or your doctor, so that companies are aware of these things happening. I don't know if that's clear, or Arno, if you want to add something to this.
No, what I can add is that, I mean, two things. The first, that we as a company, we advocate for, I mean, the convergence to the strictest and highest possible regulatory standard. And I mean, yes, not all European countries are yet part of the EU, but I think there's a lot of discussions and support from European Medicines Agency and national agencies that work together. So that's something that we are very much favorable to and try to work. There is also an international ICH process where regulatory agencies work together. I mean, the only way to harmonize here and to work together is to get higher standard and go into the direction of the strictest possible regulatory systems in the EU, in the US, just to name two of them. And we as a company, clearly, we do manufacture our medicines to the highest standard. So most of our, I mean, all manufacturing sites supply, among others, the EU and the US market. It means that we have to follow and respect the requirements by these two agencies, which is, I think, a guarantee for patients.
Okay, thank you. Jelena, would you like to comment on this?
Yes, I just wanted to make it clear. It's not that why are they done and produced by the regulatory, it's whether they are well tolerated by the patients, because they can be, not all generics are well tolerated by the patients. When you have the originated drug, you have to take it because it is your life-saving drug and you don't doubt about side effects that you're having. But when you have a generic drug, and then even though it is made perfectly by all the regulations, it may be just not tolerated as well. And at that point, you have different drugs that you can try that will have the same efficacy, but better quality of life and less side effects. So it's not the question of regulatory, it's the question of tolerability by the patients, which comes from the patients. And we should advocate for them to report it to their doctors so that we know with generic, no matter, we just assume that all of them are made perfectly. So just to be sure that they are getting the one which suits them best.
I think that that's a very fair point, Jelena, and I think that we definitely, and this is, I think, that the most important thing, reporting any side effects that patients experience. I think that this is, to me, a key takeaway message. Just to say that I think that the experience, at least at EU level, in approving different generic medicines guarantees to you that if you comply with the EU standard, theoretically at least, you should not experience any differences. But I think that, of course, there are different excipients. in certain very specific cases, patients might have a lower tolerance to a certain excipient, but in principle, the effect and how it manifests in the body of the patient, this should be the same. So that's why I think that it's very important that this is reported to regulators, and this is investigated, in fact, so we can know what is the issue and whether there is an issue with a particular product or not.
But also, I'm sorry, but just a short. But on the markets where there are no drugs, we always vote for drugs. We should not forget that too.
Definitely. Yes. But it's a very valid point, and patients first should talk to their clinician if they experience side effects, because potentially if they change from one generic to another, maybe their tolerability will be better. So this is also important, that patients should bear in mind that they can react differently to different generics. Okay, I think we can also answer one question on access. We have a question from Mira. How do you explain the fact that if the originator drug did not reach a market before the patent expires, generics tend not to come into the country or come with a great delay?
Yes, I can start here. So the situation is that in that case, when the originator has not been present in a given country, it means that physicians usually have not been trained or used to have the product. That could be one reason. It could be also then regulatory reasons. In certain markets, it might be difficult for us to register if the product has not been available in the past. Again, I mean, we have all sorts of systems across Europe, but yes, that's the two main reasons why it's very difficult for us as a generic company to come to the market. We really, I would say, fit in the shoes of what has been done in the previous years. If nothing has been done for a specific product in the previous years, it's very hard for us to go into a market. We cannot compare with an originator company that has reps, that has people that go and visit the physicians. That's usually not the case of our companies.
Mira, does it answer your question?
Well, it does. I mean, I know that, but I have asked it for all of us to think about it, because actually I'm thinking of situations like when you are going for a hike, you tend to have speed of a slowest walker. So if we are working globally and regionally and European all together, we do need to consider what happens to these patients who actually are somewhere not very far from us, not very far from EU borders like Bosnia is. I'm just saying Bosnia, but there are others, and they are left, and somehow patient organization is supposed to sort their problems and make, push the system, but that's not possible. I think somehow pharma companies, originator pharma companies and generic companies and possibly patient organizations like here, like Myeloma Patient Europe and Global, we do need to sit down and say, is it okay to allow people to go around, buy medication online in various pharmacies? They don't know what they are getting. The physicians are also using that. So I think the situation is, if we highlight that, I think it's a huge problem we have, and we should really give a lot of effort to sort it out so that every patient is cared for. I can talk more, but I won't. I know we are close to the end.
We are close to the end, but I think you touched also a very important topic. What can patient advocates do? How can patient advocates cooperate with generic companies, for example? Raluca, Arnaud, would you like to give us some advice?
Sorry, Barbara. I mean,
Yeah.
we did in Croatia, we cooperated with 2 really great generic companies, and that's why they agreed to sell to Bosnian patients at sort of like, if you compare 400 euros to 80 euros, but they have to go through a program, through this program we have. So we have negotiated. So I think that's the point. So maybe Raluca can tell us maybe something else on top of it.
So I think that Mira, of course, yours and also the example that we had from Carolina are really excellent examples on how to collaborate with companies. So I think that it is true that it is much easier at times if the request comes from a patient organization and not from individual patients themselves, although I'm sure that also all our member companies and also us, we would respond to requests that we receive. I think that generally speaking, it's important to keep in mind that obviously resources are very different. So I would say that us as Medicines for Europe, we're happy to put you in touch with our members. You have my email, Kate and Barbara as well have my email, so I'm happy to be contacted. Whether anything can be done, I think that that's a matter of the individual situation, because sometimes it can, sometimes it cannot. But I know that also Sandoz has quite good collaboration with patient community, so I will maybe let Arnaud go into the details of that, of how it works for individual companies.
Yeah, thank you, Raluca, and thank you for the question. I mean, again, we've seen and we just touched just the tip of the iceberg today, the fragmentation of the complexity of the systems in the EU, outside of the EU, makes it almost impossible for I mean, I learned a lot of things again today. So, I mean, you know, and you're best placed to know exactly how it happens at your country level, what patients get or don't get, if there is a bottleneck, if there is a problem. So that's really what you bring, is you bring a perspective that we just don't have, or it's very hard for us to have it. Having said that, we don't have people dedicated to relation with patient association in each and every country, but you can always reach out to the medical team. There's always someone that will answer your questions, or if you come with a problem, side effect, scientific question, pricing and reimbursement question, access question, we'll try to look at it and provide an answer if we have one. If not, we try to connect you with the right person. So that's really for us the value of a discussion like today, or any engagement with you.
Can I just share one experience in CML?
Go ahead.
So I'm working in the Central Eastern European and West Asia market, so it means complete diversity of my region. So what we try to do, we try to encourage the countries which are non-EU countries to try to put in their laws, by working with healthcare professionals and policymakers, that the drugs which are registered in EU should be automatically registered or accepted in the countries. So it will make the decisions for the generics coming into the country where there is no originated drug register more easily. So for example, there is a drug, there was no originated drug in the country, but then there is a special clause in the law which says, okay, if this drug was already registered and approved by EU, it should be accepted in the country itself. So we try to teach the advocates how to communicate with their healthcare professionals and their policymakers to put this in the law, because the generic markets are enormous and there is not so big question of how expensive they are.
Excellent comment. Thank you very much, Jelena. I'm afraid we need to wrap up now. But thanks a lot to all our speakers today. Thanks for sharing your perspectives with us and answering the questions. I know that there are many questions that were not answered, but we will gather them and we will try to answer them via email or via our newsletter. The MPE team will take care of it. And once again, thanks a lot, everyone, and have a very nice evening. Bye.